Hello all. I'd like to start this part of the workshop with an acknowledgement. While I might be presenting today, I'm representing the combined work of the several professionals shown in the photo on the left and from the list of organizations on the right who have worked over the last 7 years on the City of Calgary Riparian Monitoring Program to bring you the findings that will be presented this morning. So a big thank you to you all. Now to start into part one of how to improve your bioengineering projects, lessons learned from the City of Calgary Riparian Monitoring Program. My name is Mike Gallant, and I'm a Senior Water Resources Engineer and Calgary Branch Manager with Kerr Leidal Associates, and the Technical Lead for their consulting team delivering the City of Calgary Riparian Monitoring Program. In this presentation, we'll be covering an introduction to bioengineering where we'll discuss definitions and terminology, benefits and limitations, a brief history, and recent trends. Then we'll talk briefly as to why the results from the RMP can help improve your bioengineering projects. To start, and to make sure we are on the same page, when I refer to bioengineering, I'm referring to the use of living plant materials to perform some engineering function, usually slope stabilization, erosion protection, and vegetation establishment. And for this presentation, we are talking about bioengineering on riverbanks for erosion protection. The photos show a bioengineering approach on the left in comparison to a conventional approach on the right with rock riprap and no vegetation. Bioengineering approaches help us achieve the goal of establishing a native plant community that will provide permanent erosion protection that can self-repair and regenerate and ultimately allow natural processes to take over to achieve our habitat restoration, biodiversity, climate change, cost, and aesthetic goals. That said, if you do an internet search for bioengineering, you'll likely end up looking at results related to medicine and biology. While the type of bioengineering we are discussing today was described in the previous slide, there are several other terms to describe this type of approach, including biotechnical, soil bioengineering, ground bioengineering, soil and water bioengineering, etc. They are generally referring to the same thing, but including additional descriptions of the location of the application or the use or not of supporting materials. While using those terms will definitely help improve your internet search, ultimately they all fall under nature-based solutions, which is gaining a lot of attention recently. For example, the Government of Canada announced in 2020 that it will invest $3.9 billion over 10 years to support the implementation of nature-based climate solutions in Canada. Note that I'll be referring only to bioengineering for the remainder of the presentation for simplicity. Bioengineering offers several benefits over conventional approaches, including improved slope stability and protects against surface erosion. Bioengineering improves riparian habitat, cover, nutrients, temperature, passage with respect to ecological benefits. There is generally a reduction in long-term maintenance costs when bioengineering projects are used. And certainly, bioengineering improves aesthetics of a site by appearing more natural. And finally, the use of bioengineering approaches typically results in smoother and quicker environmental approvals. All that good stuff said, there are some limitations to the use of a bioengineering approach. They are not suitable for all sites. A good example is areas with significant slope stability concerns, as shown in the graphic in the top right, or significant erosion issues, as shown in the photo in the middle right. Periodic monitoring and maintenance of a bioengineering site may be more often initially than traditional methods, at least until the vegetation establishes. There are also important considerations when living vegetation is incorporated into a design versus conventional construction methods. For example, vegetation is susceptible to drought and will likely require irrigation in arid locations like southern Alberta. Soil conditions are also important, where conditions that are toxic or inhospitable to vegetation will likely result in low project success. The photo on the bottom right shows a dead cutting that was planted in anaerobic soil conditions, for example. Site aspect and shade conditions also affect vegetation success, as do grazing and trampling. And for some circumstances, bioengineering projects can be more costly due to more complicated construction methods and scheduling, and high cost of vegetation included in the techniques. However, unplanned long-term maintenance of a site that gets colonized by invasive weeds and also not meeting habitat offset obligations when required can more than offset additional construction costs. It's important to note that bioengineering approaches aren't new. For example, Chinese historians recorded use of bioengineering techniques for dike repair as early as 28 BC. Bioengineering has been documented in Europe since the 1600s, and in the US has occurred since the late 1800s. In Canada, the Acadians in eastern Canada, which is my heritage, were building bioengineering structures such as living dikes, known as aboiteaux, in the 17th century, and bioengineering projects have been documented in Quebec and Alberta in the 1970s. Textbooks were developed in English starting in 1980, and courses on the subject were being taught in Alberta from the 1980s to early 2000s. Demonstration and pilot projects were constructed in the 1980s and 2000s and included as case studies in key books and manuals on the subject. Then the City of Calgary developed the Bioengineering Design Guidelines in 2012 with AMEC, Cows and Fish, Pierre Raymond from Terra Erosion Control. And after the 2013 flood in Calgary, where over 35 kilometers of riverbank were damaged, there was what one might consider a rediscovery and a resurgence in the use of bioengineering techniques. A few examples are shown here, including the bioengineering demonstration and education project that will be presented as a case study later this morning. So as I mentioned, there has been a resurgence in the use of bioengineering techniques since the 90s in Europe, the US, and Canada, and in particular in Calgary since the 2005 and 2013 floods, as shown in this chart, where conventional projects are shown in black and green approaches to bank and riparian restoration are shown in green by year. So before the 2013 flood, there was approximately 12 green, bank, and riparian projects, and you can clearly see a spike in the number of bank and riparian projects 2 years after the 2013 flood, in part because the city's flood recovery program engineers began directing project consultants working on riverbank projects to incorporate bioengineering, especially if the site was overlapping an identified conservation or restoration management zone along Calgary's rivers. There is also an increase in need for bioengineering and green techniques, with an increasing trend in extreme weather and natural disasters, as shown on this chart from the University of Waterloo and the Intact Center on Climate Adaptation. Nature-based solutions like bioengineering are intended to help mitigate the impact of extreme weather events and provide a green approach to restore areas that have been impacted by severe weather. So we've established that there is an increase in use and need for bioengineering, but there remains the observation documented in several scientific articles that there is a gap in our understanding of the performance of bioengineering projects to build confidence in nature-based solutions such as bioengineering that needs to be filled by long-term monitoring programs, such as stated by the quote from the CSA in 2023. Another quote from an important paper by colleagues in Europe states that monitoring longevity and efficacy of engineering structures and live plant material over time is one of the 10 key issues facing practitioners and researchers. So the RMP responds to the issue of lack of performance monitoring by helping to fill that data gap, both in terms of documenting methods and providing useful data. As Norma highlighted, the RMP includes detailed observations from 69 sites over 99 assessments, and the RMP database contains plant measurement data for survival, health, vigor, leader growth, diameter, shoot length, and density for almost 11,000 individual trees and shrubs. This dataset is very large and we're told unique worldwide. For example, after reviewing the literature for similar programs, Andre Yvette from our project team found several studies with various numbers of sites, but less detailed analysis than the RMP. He also looked at the literature for assessments of live cuttings establishments and health, and found that the data was mainly for a small number of species and cuttings that were mostly in experimental conditions. Ultimately, the size and quality of the RMP data is what sets this program apart and makes the results useful for identifying practices that will help to improve your bioengineering project. The key results from the RMP are summarized in a final program report that is available to download from the City of Calgary website at www.calgary.ca/Riparian. The list of general findings, observations, and statistical results that are included in the final report are shown here and are mostly interweaved through today's presentations. In summary, bioengineering is the use of vegetation to perform an engineering function. Recently, there has been an increase in use and need for bioengineering approaches. However, the lack of long-term performance data has highlighted variable project outcomes and led to hesitant practitioners. The RMP has a lot of data and results to help improve outcomes and convince hesitant practitioners.